Welcome to the U.S. latest news channel. Watch the video to the end to find out the current and breaking news about the Russian war in Ukraine. The intelligence authorities of densely inhabited by Crimean Tatars in Ukraine Simferopol, Stroganivka, Bakhcysaray, Saky, Azovske, Ukraine Zuya Kirovske, and the invading Russian army of Crimean Tatars in areas forcibly taken from their homes and who are citizens of Russia on behalf of Ukraine in the fight against announced that they were being taken to concentration camps established under partial mobilization. In areas where Crimean Tatars live extensively, interventions against Crimean Tatars who were detained by the Russian army and rated to be taken to camps were carried out by police officers located in Crimea and the security service established by the Russian army. An independent broadcaster with the invading Russian army in the homes of Crimean Tatar men forcibly intervened on behalf of the independent also claimed that his home broke, and recruiting in the Russian army of the Crimean Tatar claimed that they were subjected to torture by the broadcaster. The Russian army also marked the houses where the men lived in the occupied areas and distributed summonses for military service as part of the partial mobilization announced by Russian President Vladimir Putin. After the Russian army distributed the summons, many men were forcibly put on military buses by the Russian army and taken to camps established as part of the mobilization. European countries have issued condemnations, saying that the forced conscription of Russian President Vladimir Putin in these occupied territories is contrary to human rights and that Vladimir Putin has committed a crime against humanity. As part of the partial mobilization announced by Russian President Vladimir Putin, compulsory military service was valid only for Russian citizens who had previously served in the Russian army for a certain period of time, but Vladimir Putin denied this information before the 300,000 people who will be recruited into the army as part of the partial mobilization were completed. This statement made by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also closely concerns the changing legislation and criminal code in Russia since the war began. On September 24th, Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that the voluntary surrender of any soldier belonging to the Russian army to Ukraine will result in 3 to 10 years in prison, and any Russian soldier who provides any information to the Ukrainian army faces a life sentence. As a result of the fact that Russian citizens who were conscripted as part of partial mobilization did not continue military service or left military service, the penalties to be imposed were increased. Within the scope of absenteeism from 2 years to 10 days, penalties up to 10 years and life imprisonment may be imposed on a person. Vladimir Putin also stated that the soldiers who joined the army as part of the partial mobilization will be punished if they do not comply with the orders of the commanders. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine claimed that in the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions ruled by Russian invaders, the authorities put pressure on the population to fight against Ukraine in exchange for Russian citizenship, and the scale of these pressures resulted in deaths. Who do you think will be the winner of the Ukrainian-Russian war? The Ukrainian Air Assault Forces Command announced on September 24, 2022, that more than one aircraft belonging to the Russian military, the number of which is unknown, was destroyed with a share it made on its social media account. The Russian Defense Ministry, on the other hand, said that the statement was correct and that only 2 Su-35 fighter jets were destroyed. The unit that destroyed the warplanes belonging to the Russian army belongs to the Ukrainian Army 8. It was stated that the Air Assault Special Forces Regiment. In the video published by the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces Command on its social media account, it was clearly seen that the Su-30 and Su-25 aircraft were destroyed. It was said that the pilots of these destroyed planes belonging to the Russian army had not received any news. Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov said that the destroyed Russian military aircraft were destroyed in the Kharkiv region thanks to Stinger manpad systems. At the same time, Narendra Modi continues to make calls that Russia's invasion should be stopped. Russian President Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, refuses to take any step back in the face of calls and reactions. Russian officials say that Ukraine is ruled by the United States and that the region will be freed from Ukraine. India is an important power for Russian President Vladimir Putin because India regularly purchases oil and other resources from Russia. It turns out as a result of research that some of the sanctions imposed on Russia have lost their effect as a result of purchases made by India. Although India has not openly supported or approved the invasion launched by Russian President Vladimir Putin, it has continued to provide economic assistance to Russia since the start of the war. As part of the announced partial mobilization, compulsory military service affects only former soldiers up to the age of 35, non-commissioned officers up to the age of 50, and officers up to the age of 55. Russian officials authorized by Putin and governing the city said that the Ukrainian army committed terrorist crimes, pointed weapons at its own people, and tried to blame these crimes on the Russian army. In the continuation of the statement, he said that Russia has not committed any terrorist crimes against the Ukrainian people and is trying to approach the Ukrainian people with tolerance, and the Ukrainian people living in the city of Kharkiv should trust themselves. On Monday last week, Haidai, a well-established figure in the Ukrainian media, confirmed that the Ukrainian flag was flying in a village east of the Oskil River, located north of the Donbass city, and Ukrainian army forces launched an intensive offensive in the region. The Russian army, on the other hand, continues to suffer defeats in the face of these attacks. The Donbass city was captured by the Russian army last July. The Ukrainian army has been carrying out intensive attacks on the Donbass city, which has been under the control of the Russian army since July. One of the senior officials in the Russian army consists of behind the attacks. In an interview with reporters in the city of Ukrainian army is using heavy weapons in the attack in the U.S., and their people hurt people with their own HIMARS systems such as that led to the death, explained. This does not mean that they cannot secretly carry out a partial mobilization, Giles said, referring to the fact that the Kremlin calls up reservists with certain degrees of service obligations. Somehow it's already happening. If you look at people who have been called up from other branches of service and taken to the front who are not suitable for their specialties, this is a kind of veiled mobilization, he added. We can expect to go on. The U.S. think tank, the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, said on Thursday that Russia responded to the defeat around the Kharkiv Oblast by doubling down on crypto mobilization instead of setting conditions for general mobilization. Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov called on all federal subjects to start self-mobilization and not wait for the Kremlin to declare martial law, the statement said. Kadyrov claimed that every federal subject must prove his readiness to help Russia by recruiting at least 1,000 soldiers, instead of giving speeches and organizing fruitless public events. The ISW also said that Kremlin officials and state media, which had not previously made nationwide recruitment calls, had given the task of building strength to local officials and outlets. Deck Friday, meanwhile, Britain's Ministry of Defense said the Wagner Group, a Kremlin-linked Russian private military company, has been trying to recruit Russian convicts since at least July. Russian military academies have shortened their training courses and brought forward the graduation dates of military cadets, possibly because they were deployed to support the war, British defense officials said. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia has even begun to receive sick and wounded soldiers from hospitals to compensate for its losses. A Kyiv organization fighting the Kremlin's covert mobilization efforts says it will step up an online recruitment drive in a desperate bid to attract more soldiers to the front line using Russia's covert advertising platforms. The Ukrainian Victims of War Foundation has been active since the beginning of the war, in particular Headhunted.ru, Avito.ru, and Superjob.ru. He said that more than 50,000 Russians have been deployed to Ukraine after being recruited through it. He took the figure, analyzing vacancy opinions, applications, and job offers. He is concerned that the Russian government, facing a manpower crisis following Ukraine's gains in the counteroffensive, will seek to nationalize online services that would have tens of millions of viewers to support the war effort. If they do this, they can be used to increase and accelerate recruitment, he said, and they are trying to monopolize this industry. Although Russian army soldiers located west of the city of Kherson suffered heavy losses as a result of intense artillery fire and missile attacks by the Ukrainian army, Russian officials said that the reports that the Russian army did not suffer losses were unfounded. The U.S., in statements made at the Pentagon, a senior retired non-commissioned officer said that it is possible for Ukraine to emerge victorious from this war and that this will happen as soon as possible. In the continuation of the statement, he stated that the Russian army is now tired and cannot handle the severe conditions imposed by the war conditions. The Ukrainian Victims of War Foundation has been active since the beginning of the war, in particular Headhunted.ru, Avito.ru, and Superjob.ru. He said that more than 50,000 Russians have been deployed to Ukraine after being recruited through it. He took the figure, analyzing vacancy opinions, applications, and job offers. He is concerned that the Russian government, facing a manpower crisis following Ukraine's gains in the counteroffensive, will seek to nationalize online services that would have tens of millions of viewers to support the war effort. If they do this, they can be used to increase and accelerate recruitment, he said, and they are trying to monopolize this industry. I think he's one of the threats we have right now. Mukin said that the analysis conducted by his foundation highlights shadow mobilization, in which there are 142 different recruiters for military vacancies, in most cases the military units themselves. Russia could not change its large fleet of military vehicles due to the long-lasting economic crisis and embargoes. He is aware that he cannot replace it with new vehicles due to the losses he suffered in the war. Pressed by other countries, Russia is experiencing serious problems in military production. It is stated that at the moment, Russian production facilities are changing and modifying the seized vehicles, thus they are working to eliminate the Russian vehicle shortage. They are trying to make up for their vehicle shortage with these vehicles belonging to the Russian people. It was stated that the seized vehicles were military-type vehicles and Jeep pickup model vehicles. It was stated that no money was paid to the owners of the vehicles whose vehicles were confiscated. It is stated that their car was taken from them without their consent and illegally. In this situation, the Russian people have problems with the seizure of vehicles by the state. Ukrainian soldiers continue to cause great damage to the Russian army at full speed. The Ukrainian army was in a weak position, and a move came from Japan, who saw this. In a statement, the Japanese Ministry of Defense announced that the Russian military plane was stopped. The Japanese Air Force announced that it has captured the Russian anti-submarine aircraft IL-39, which is located near the borders of Japanese airspace. In the statements of the Japanese Ministry of Defense, the images of the intervention on the Russian plane were published on social media platforms. Russian authorities denied these allegations. But the Japanese Ministry of Defense is threatening to interfere with the Russian plane in their hands. It is not known exactly when the Russian warplane was intercepted by the Japanese Air Force. He says that according to war strategists, Russia should give up this behavior towards Japan, otherwise Russian-Japanese relations may deteriorate to a great extent. At least one Chechen battalion is preparing for a second attack on Moscow, according to a spokesperson for the volunteer fighter group based in Ukraine. A spokesperson for Vladimir Putin's Kiev Sheikh Mansour battalion said in a video message posted on social media last week that Russia may soon be fighting over its own country. Ukraine's Faultline media platform continued, saying once again that a war strategy for Chechen independence was being developed. The Chechen Republic is currently divided into three fronts. Unwavering support in Ukraine Sheikh Monster Battalion said that they have successfully divided Chechnya into three regions and started working with civilians, emphasizing that it will reveal the movements of the enemy troops, revealing the number of weapons and the number of weapons. Kofla emphasized that even if there is no second fight for the throne in Chechnya, it is not impossible. He stated that Putin is putting pressure on the churches and volunteer unions, that possible cooperation with Kiev on this issue is unknown, and that he will convince Putin and the Russians that they need it. They said they would do their best to stop paying attention to Ukraine, which loves Ukrainians, to end the war there. Russia is in trouble in the Ukraine-Russia war. Russia started to fall apart from other countries. Russia asked us not to make an ally of Japan. Deploy U.S. military and missile systems in areas near Russia. Russia has recently started deploying missile defense systems close to Japan. Therefore, there is the possibility of a crisis between the two. Although the countries see Russia's war with Ukraine, it seems that the events will grow more if the tension between Moscow and Tokyo does not decrease. Negotiations with Russia on the return of northern territories. As a result of these events, Russia increased the number of ships and planes entering Japan's air and sea areas. According to the latest statement made by the Japanese authorities, the relations between the two countries began to deteriorate. If Russia continues this attitude, we will do what is necessary. Russia will suffer the consequences. The shocking incident in the Russian army. According to the claim, the Russian Chief of Staff, Valery Gerasimov, was poisoned after the meal he ate. According to the rumors, it is said that Valery Gerasimov was poisoned by the food she ate at the Russian headquarters. This information was shared from a Russian channel with many followers from Telegram. The general, who was immediately hospitalized, has been subjected to many assassination attempts over the years. It turned out that the Russian general was allergic to one of the ingredients in the food. The president, who had an allergic reaction after the meal he ate during the Ukrainian-Russian war, was immediately taken to the hospital. This event shocked Russia. On the 172nd day of the Ukrainian-Russian war, we present to you the events of the war in the most accurate and fastest way. According to the statement made by the Ukrainian armed forces, intense clashes continue between the two sides. A person named Trilovi, one of Ukraine's high-level executives, got into his car and was blown up together with the car. After the meticulous and successful operation of the Ukrainian intelligence, a big explosion occurred when the Russian administrator, who got into his car. An administrator who gave great support to the Russian occupation of Ukraine was one of the names that determined the war strategies of the Russian army during this occupation. The murder of this general by the Ukrainian army was met with surprise and sadness by the top Russian generals. He was one of the most trusted men of General Putin, who died during the explosion. The death of the general will cause great material and moral damage to the Russian army. Since the invasion of Ukraine began, no explanation has been made about the soldiers who died, and this creates huge problems. Moscow has announced the number of soldiers killed only once. The Kremlin issued a statement on March